I never thought Christmas could test the meaning of love, but that year it did. I remember waking up early to the sound of soft music in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and apple pie filling the air. It was supposed to be our first Christmas in the new house, a new beginning after everything we had been through. My husband Daniel was humming an old tune, and for a moment I felt safe again. I smiled, thinking maybe this year would be peaceful. Maybe this year would finally feel normal. But life had other plans. I walked into the kitchen and saw him holding his phone, a look on his face that I could not read. I asked him what happened, and he said, "Nothing, just a message from someone I used to know." I brushed it off. I trusted him, or maybe I just wanted to believe that trust still existed after what we had survived. The past year had been hard. He had lost his job, then found another one in another city. We had moved away from everyone we knew and tried to build a life together again. I worked long hours at a hospital, and he spent time trying to adjust. It was not easy, but we were trying. That morning, he told me he wanted to invite a few people from work for Christmas dinner. He said it would be good for us to have company. I said, sure, why not? We had space, we had food, we had time. I spent the day decorating the living room while he went out to get some things. He said we needed more lights. I laughed because the house already looked like a Christmas movie, but he insisted he wanted it perfect. I noticed he came home later than he said he would. His eyes looked tired, but he smiled when he saw me. He hugged me tighter than usual and said, "I missed you." I believed him then. As the sun set and snow began to fall, our home glowed with warmth. Lights sparkled across the tree and soft carols played on the radio. I changed into a red dress, Daniel wore his favorite sweater, and for the first time in months, he looked happy again. Guests started arriving, laughter filled the room. I served food and tried to relax, but something felt off. Daniel kept looking at his phone. I ignored it until the doorbell rang again. When I opened the door, my heart froze. Standing there was a woman, tall, beautiful, dressed elegantly, and holding a small gift bag. Daniel walked over quickly and said, "This is Claire. She is an old friend from college." I knew that name. I had heard it once before, in the early days of our marriage when he told me about the one who got away. Claire. She smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you for having me." I tried to smile back, but something inside me broke a little. I did not know he still talked to her. I didn't even know she lived nearby. I said, "Come in, the more the merrier." Her perfume filled the air as she walked past me. Daniel poured her a drink and they began to talk like old friends. Their laughter felt too easy, too familiar. I stood there watching, pretending it did not hurt. The way he looked at her, the way she touched his arm when she laughed. It was like I had become invisible. I went into the kitchen and tried to focus on the food, but my hands were shaking. I kept hearing their voices. Every word felt like a knife. After dinner, Daniel suggested we all exchange small gifts. I had bought him a watch, something he had wanted for months. When he opened it, his eyes lit up and he said, "This is perfect. Thank you, love." But then Claire stood up and said, "I have something for you too." She handed him a small box. He opened it and I saw his face change. Inside was a photo of the two of them, younger, smiling, arms around each other. My chest tightened. She said, "I found it when I was moving and thought you might want it back." I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I was falling apart. The room went quiet for a moment, then someone changed the topic and laughter returned. But I could not breathe. I walked outside into the cold night air. Snowflakes fell on my hair. The street was silent. Only the faint sound of music came from inside the house. I looked through the window and saw them still talking, still smiling like nothing had changed. I wanted to scream, but instead I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Hold it together, just hold it together." I stayed outside for a long time, watching my breath fade into the cold night air. My hands were freezing, but I could not bring myself to go back inside. The laughter from the house sounded distant, almost cruel. I thought about the years Daniel and I had shared, the sacrifices, the forgiveness, the endless effort to rebuild something fragile. I thought we had made it through everything that mattered, but seeing Claire brought back every insecurity, every fear I had ever buried. Walked back in. Daniel was standing by the tree, holding a glass of wine. He smiled when he saw me, but there was worry in his eyes. He asked if I was okay. I nodded and said, just needed some air. He touched my arm gently and whispered, "You know I love you, right?" I said, "I know," and smiled, but the words felt hollow. Claire was sitting by the fireplace, talking to one of our guests. She looked too comfortable, like she belonged there. I could see her eyes follow Daniel whenever he moved. I told myself, maybe it was nothing, maybe I was overreacting, but deep down I knew something had shifted. Later that night, after everyone left, the house was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Daniel started cleaning up and I helped in silence. He finally said, "I hope you were not uncomfortable tonight. Claire just wanted to drop by since she was in town." I said, "It's fine," and forced a smile. But he looked at me like he knew it was not fine. He said, "You can trust me, you know." I said, "I do," but the truth was that trust was no longer whole. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Daniel breathed softly beside me. I kept replaying the evening in my mind. The way he laughed with her, the way she looked at him, the way my heart clenched every time they spoke. When morning came, I decided to forget it. I told myself she would be gone and life would go back to normal, but I was wrong. The next few days, Daniel seemed distracted. He smiled less. He checked his phone more. I tried to talk to him, but he brushed it off, saying work was stressful. Then one evening, I found a message on his phone from Claire. She had written, "Thank you for last night. It meant more than you know." My stomach twisted. I confronted him, and he said she was just talking about the party, that I was overthinking. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I stopped asking questions and started watching quietly. I noticed the way he stepped outside to take calls, the way he smiled at messages, the way his mood changed suddenly. One afternoon, I followed him to town. I told myself it was wrong, but my heart needed to know. He stopped by a cafe near his office. I parked across the street and waited. Then I saw her, Claire, sitting by the window smiling as he walked in. They hugged, and for a moment it looked like time had rewound to a place where I did not exist. I felt sick. I wanted to burst in and demand answers, but instead I drove away, tears blurring the road. I did not know where I was going. I just drove until the streets turned empty. I ended up by the lake where Daniel had once proposed. The water was frozen, the sky heavy with clouds. I stood there alone and whispered, "Why am I never enough?" When I came home later, he was already there, waiting for me. He looked worried and asked where I had been. I said, "Just driving, needed space." He nodded and hugged me, but I could feel the distance in his touch. That night, I decided I would not fight for something that no longer wanted me. Christmas was only 2 days away, and I made a choice. I would host that dinner, with every ounce of grace I had left, but I would not let her or him break me again. When the day came, I dressed up. The house sparkled, even brighter than before. Daniel seemed nervous, like he was waiting for something. I pretended not to notice until the doorbell rang, and there she was again. Claire, smiling, like she had been invited back to her own past. I welcomed her politely and said, "I'm glad you could come." Her smile faltered a little, maybe because she sensed something different in me. Maybe she knew I was not the same woman from last week. A play where I was no longer the lead, just a background character in my own home. I excused myself to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, breathing slowly, trying not to cry. A few minutes later, Daniel walked in. He asked if I was okay again, and I said yes. I just needed to check the food. He came closer, touched my shoulder, and said, "You know you do not have to be jealous, right?" I said quietly, "I am not jealous. I am just tired." He nodded, but I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, and then he walked back to the living room. I stayed there alone. My reflection in the dark window looked like someone I did not know anymore. When I finally returned, everyone was gathered around the table, ready for dinner. I smiled, served the food, and listened to the chatter. It felt like time was dragging. I could see Claire stealing glances at Daniel, her eyes full of something unspoken. After dessert, she stood up and asked if she could say something. She raised her glass and said, "I just want to thank Daniel and his wonderful wife for having me tonight. You both remind me of what real love looks like." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes lingered on him longer than they should have. Everyone clapped politely. Daniel smiled awkwardly. I said, "Thank you, Claire. We are glad you could join us." I thought that would be the end, but then she added softly, "Sometimes love never really leaves. It just changes form." My stomach turned, but I kept smiling. When the night ended, the guests began leaving one by one. Claire stayed behind. She said she wanted to help clean up. Daniel looked hesitant, but I said, "Sure, that would be nice." We gathered dishes in silence until she said quietly, "I never stopped caring about him, you know?" My hands froze. I looked at her and said, "Then maybe you should have stayed in the past." She smiled faintly and said, "Maybe, but some things do not stay buried forever." I stared at her and said, "Then let the dead rest, Claire." She blinked and looked away. Daniel walked in at that exact moment asking what was going on. I said nothing, just finishing up. He looked between us but said nothing more. Claire said goodnight and walked out the door. The air felt heavy. I turned to Daniel and said, "I want the truth." He looked at me like a man cornered. I said, "How long have you been seeing her?" He said, "I am not seeing her. She reached out. I just wanted to be kind." I said, "Kind looks a lot like betrayal." He said, "It's not like that." But his voice broke. I walked past him to the window, watching Claire drive away, her taillights fading into the snow. Daniel whispered, "I love you. Please believe me." I wanted to. I really did, but something inside me had already begun to fade. That night, we slept side by side like strangers. His hand reached for mine in the dark, but I could not move. I lay awake until dawn, thinking about the life I had built and the pieces that were slipping away. The next morning, the snow outside was heavy. The streets were silent and white. Daniel made coffee and tried to smile, but his eyes looked empty. I said nothing. I just sat there, watching the steam rise from the cup, pretending everything was fine. The silence between us grew thicker with each passing hour. He went out to shovel the driveway, and I watched him through the window, thinking about all the promises we had made, the vows, the plans, the dreams. Somewhere along the line, we had stopped being partners and started being two people surviving in the same house. Later that day, my friend Emily came over. She noticed my swollen eyes and asked what was wrong. I told her everything, from the night Claire arrived to the look on Daniel's face when I asked for the truth. She listened quietly, then said, "Sometimes people test your love without realizing they are breaking it." I nodded and tried not to cry again. When she left, I felt a strange calmness inside me, like a decision was forming, even if I could not name it yet. Daniel came home early that evening, holding a small bouquet of flowers. He said, "I'm sorry, I should have told you she called me before the first dinner. She said she was lonely. She said she wanted to make peace. I thought it was harmless. I should have known better." I said, "Why did you not tell me?" He said, "I didn't want to upset you." I said, "The lie hurts more than the truth." He sat down, his face in his hands, and whispered, "I messed up. I really messed up." I said, "Yes, you did, but I still love you. I don't know what that means right now, but I do." He looked up at me, his eyes wet, and said, "I'll fix this. I promise." I said, "Then start by letting her go for good." The next day, he blocked her number, deleted her messages, and even changed his phone. She tried to reach him, but he ignored her. I thought maybe that was the end. Maybe we could move forward. But life does not always heal so easily. Christmas morning arrived. The house was quiet. The air felt fragile. Daniel surprised me with breakfast in bed. He said he wanted to start new. I smiled faintly and said, "Okay, let us try." Later that day, we decided to invite just a few close friends to share dinner. No big crowd, no noise, just warmth and peace. But fate had other plans. As the evening went on, the doorbell rang again. I opened it thinking it was one of our guests, but my heart sank. It was Claire, standing there in the cold, her eyes red from crying. She said, "I just need to talk to him. Please, only for a minute." Daniel came to the door, his face pale. He said, "Claire, you should not be here." She said, "I need to say goodbye, please." I could see he wanted to shut the door, but something in her tone stopped him. I said, "Let her speak." She stepped inside and looked around the house. Softly, she said, "I wanted to apologize. I should not have come between you two. I thought I could handle seeing you happy, but I was wrong. I've been holding on to something that ended long ago. I needed to let it go." Daniel said, "You did hurt us, but I forgive you." She looked at me and said, "I am sorry. I did not mean to cause you pain. You are stronger than me." I nodded, unsure what to feel. She placed a small envelope on the table and said, "I wrote this before coming here. It explains everything." Then she turned to leave. I watched her walk to the door, but Daniel stopped her and said, "Take care of yourself, Claire." She smiled faintly and whispered, "You too." After she left, Daniel picked up the envelope and looked at it for a long time. Then he handed it to me and said, "You should read it." I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper smelled faintly of perfume. The words were shaky. She had written that she had been struggling since her divorce, that seeing Daniel again had reminded her of the only time in her life she had felt safe. She wrote that she never wanted to ruin our marriage. She just wanted to feel seen again, to remember who she used to be. She ended with, "I know he belongs to you now. I hope you can forgive me for forgetting that for a while." I folded the letter and set it on the table. Daniel sat beside me and said, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to do the right thing, and I ended up hurting you instead." I said, "Maybe we both forgot what love really needs. It is not just loyalty, it is honesty and choice." He said, "I choose you every time." I said, "Then prove it, not with promises, but with presence." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. That night we sat by the fire in silence, no words, just the warmth of the flames and the soft hum of old Christmas music. It felt fragile but real, like a tiny light trying to survive in a storm. The next morning, Daniel went out early. I thought he had gone for a walk, but when he came back, he carried something small in his hands. It was the photo Claire had given him, the one from their past. He said, "I went to return this. I told her goodbye. She said she was leaving town today." I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I said, "Thank you." And he said, "No, thank you for staying." I smiled faintly and said, "Maybe staying is its own kind of bravery." Later that day, we hosted dinner again, just the two of us. Candles flickering, outside the snow falling soft and endless, as the world seemed to quiet itself around us. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "I do not deserve you." I said, "Maybe not, but love is not about deserving. It is about choosing again and again, even when it hurts." After dinner, I went to throw away some wrapping paper and noticed the envelope still on the table. I almost tossed it, but something made me open it again. There was a small folded photo inside, not of Daniel and Claire, but of Claire alone, standing near the lake where Daniel had proposed to me. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Let go so you can live." I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in the fireplace and watched it burn. The flames swallowed the past, slowly, quietly, peacefully. I looked at Daniel and said, "Maybe now we can start over." He said, "Yes, we can." And for the first time, his voice sounded steady. Christmas lights glowed across the walls, their reflection dancing in his eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling, endless and white. Inside our home, what music played soft and slow, a reminder that even broken hearts can heal with time, as long as love chooses to stay. And though I never saw Claire again, I sometimes think about her, not with anger, but with a kind of understanding because I knew what it felt like to lose someone, and I knew what it took to forgive someone. And maybe in the end, we both found peace in our own way.